Ibn Jellaba was a trader of Araby, intent on opening up a trade route to the interior of the Southlands to procure spices and gold. He trekked over the desert with a camel caravan until he reached the jungles of the Southlands. Here he encountered the Lizardmen city of Zlatlan, which had been remaining hidden for millennia. This Lizardman realm far to the south of the Great Desert was known to the Arabyans only by rumour and legend, and the uncertain reports of chance encounters between desert nomads and the dreaded Al-Sorim. Ibn survived the adventure and made his way back overland to Araby, where the Sultan instructed that his adventures be written down. The following extracts describe Ibn's encounters with the Lizardmen.
Lorehammer Library!
I, Ibn Jellaba, made the trek from Kar into the interior. No one had ever done this before and lived to tell the tale. The Sultan of Araby provided me with 50 camels and an escort of exceptionally loyal eunuch soldiers from his palace guard, commanded by Hakim, a champion of immense size and courage. I myself hired several Tuareg scouts to lead me across the desert. I was seeking a land route to the gold and spice lands of the south, beyond the great jungle. At this time, the merchants of La Sheikh were in fierce rivalry with the Cathian ships that had appeared in the southern oceans, seeking to take over the sea trade routes. As well as this, the elf ships of Ulthuan were attempting to keep the routes to themselves. It was for this reason that the Sultan instructed me to discover an overland route across the great desert, saying, "Find a way with the ships of the desert. Navigate by the stars, and bring back the riches from under the noses of our rivals." Ibn goes on to mention in the account of his journey the rumour of the Al-Sorim, and wonders whether he will encounter them, or if they will be hostile. Some of the Tuaregs that he has hired claim to have seen them. He then describes the first stage of the journey across the desert, and we pick up the tale where his expedition reaches the edge of the jungle. After trekking for 3 weeks across the burning void, we reached green land covered with scrub and thorn bushes. My Tuaregs were able to smell water on the breeze, and so we found several unknown oases and waterholes. I carefully recorded the position of these according to the sightings upon the sun, moon, and stars, so that those who might come after us shall not die of thirst. I also had these places marked with cairns of stones. No one from Araby had ever been to this green land before, not even the Tuaregs, and so we were all on our guard against ambushes and wild beasts. I had to promise the Tuaregs more gold to persuade them to leave the desert and continue with me into this unknown land, although it was very luscious. After several days, the trees became more numerous, and soon the vegetation was so dense that the eunuchs were hardly able to cut a way through with their scimitars. Then suddenly we came upon a paved road, open to the sky. The road was very ancient and overgrown with weeds, and stretched far towards the distant horizon. As it was certainly aligned upon the southern constellation, I decided that we should follow it. At the time, I believed it had been made by the people of Al-Nehekaria long ago. We followed the road southwards through the jungle for many days. It would not have been possible for us to hack our way through the dense vegetation on either side of the road at this point. There were many treacherous swamps, and the road crossed over these by means of causeways. It was good that we had brought camels with us, because although we often came upon water, it was naturally not normally safe to drink. In one place, some camels were fed to a pool and left to drink. They became irritated and all at once stampeded. In the pool we found the carcass of one of the camels, which had been reduced to skeleton by ferocious creatures that dwelt there. Sometimes we saw the eyes of reptiles appear above the water, as if watching us. At length, the top of a tall tower was seen, shimmering in the far southern horizon. The road was aligned directly towards it. At first, we all thought that this must be a mirage of the elven citadel on the coast of the Southlands. But it was not, for later we could see the towering structure was in fact shaped in the form of a stepped pyramid. It was not at all like the pyramids of Kemri, which were smooth and end in a point that pierces the sky. This pyramid ended in a flat platform. We were within sight of the city of the Lizardmen, when we were spied from above by their scouts. They flew high over us, riding upon the backs of great winged lizards, and then circled like vultures, slowly descending lower and lower. All the time the riders were observing us. Soon they were gliding and swooping very low. Their shadows fell over the camel caravan, causing the camels, which were always bad-tempered, to grunt and bellow and become unmanageable. I harangued the Tuareks, saying that no one was to shoot arrows up at them, or they would be executed. I was anxious not to provoke fighting that would certainly end in our destruction. We carried on, and the flying scouts, having taken a good look at us, swooped off towards the distant pyramids. Later that day, as we were leading the camels across another causeway, Al-Sorim, carrying weapons and ornaments of copper and gold, suddenly swarmed out of the weed-choked pools from either side. They were bright turquoise, with yellow crests, and gathered on either side of their standard like a regiment of soldiers, barring our way with their weapons. The camels halted, and the eunuchs stepped forward with their scimitars to form a battle line. I stepped forward myself, making gestures of peace and friendship of all the desert tribes that I could think of, in the hope that it would cause a recognition of one of their names. Their leader, who was bedecked in feathers, edged towards me. It was I who spoke first. "Salam, brother! We come in peace." He spoke to me in his own tongue, which I could not understand. It was time to declare the reason for our entry to his land before they decided to attack us. I beckoned bearers to bring forward all manner of good things from the land of Araby, and laid them out on the causeway. Then I retreated back to the eunuchs, so that the chief of the Al-Sorim could examine our merchandise, and I could bring closure to my speech. The chief and several other lizardmen were looking at our goods displayed upon the causeway. They wore a great amount of gold ornaments, proving that they were important officers or champions. While this was going on, Hakim the eunuch had noticed that another company of Al-Sorim had appeared behind us. These were much bigger warriors than the ones that stood in our front. They were armed with spears and shields of bronze which glinted in the sun. These were undoubtedly the best warriors of the Al-Sorim. Those inspecting the merchandise now turned away, leaving all of it where it was. They retreated a little way along the road and scurried off into the trees. This revealed what was behind them. Another densely packed regiment of Alsorim, armed with great bronze scimitars and bucklers, behind a huge standard surmounted by one of their idols. Our path was blocked in both directions, and there was no escape across the swamps. The Alsorim stood motionless. The chiefs, who were head and shoulders above the rest, kept them under strict discipline. All this time the hot sun beat down on us from above. I discussed our predicament with Hakim. We agreed that it was better to wait, since they did not move to attack us. If they did attack, then he and the eunuchs would try to hack their way along the road. Either way, we would meet our fate honorably. As the sun was about to set, and the moon was clear above the horizon, the ranks of warriors parted to let through a group of smaller Alsorim. They were dignitaries of some sort, carrying scrolls and other strange artifacts. The leader began to speak in a different tongue from the one that they had used before. I listened for a long time, and then I knew that he was speaking in the ancient tongue of the Al-Nehekaren, although he was barely able to pronounce the words. This is a very evil tongue, used now only by wicked sorcerers, and it is only because I am a scholar that I recognized it. I am one of the few whom the Sultan allows to read the forbidden scrolls, for I am strong in faith and will not be corrupted. I was at first afraid that the Alsorim might be the followers of the evil ones of the Al-Nehekaren, but they spoke the archaic tongue, as it was spoken long before the evil came to that accursed land. Unfortunately, all the efforts of the speaker were in vain, because I did not know the language well enough to reply, and indeed it is forbidden for the subjects of the Sultan to speak out loud the words of that accursed tongue. At length, the leader of the Alsorim gave up speaking to me, but I had understood some of what he had said. He had asked me many questions about the shape of the world and the realms of the many nations and races. These questions had come from his overlord who presided over the city. In order to reply to the questions, and also as a gesture of peace, I ordered my boxes of charts to be brought up and opened, so that he could inspect them. The leader of the Alsorim was most impressed, and had all his savants gather up my charts, and also all the mathematical instruments, including my astrolabe and compass. Assuming them to be gifts, they scurried off in a state of great fascination.
So at this point in the story, the skink took away the gifts, well, at least in his head, that this man had given to their mage priest. He takes it all the way back to the temple, to the mage priest, and him and his troops escort Ibn and his men to the other parts of the city, and they are cared for very well, by all accounts that are written. Ibn Jellaba's tale now includes a long report of his observations in the city and how, through long and difficult conversations, the skink scribes promised to help him return to his own lands with gifts for the Sultan in return for his help in a great expedition which they were planning already when he arrived. The highly intelligent skinks somehow managed to acquire some knowledge of Arabian, making communication easier. At this point, Ibn was able to convey the Sultan's desire for permission for the merchants of Araby to lead caravans along the road of the Lizardmen to reach the spices and gold of the south. The Mage Lord would not permit this, or even in return for a tribute of gold of any amount that was offered, he refused. Ibn, however, did manage to get back his mathematical instruments and charts, so he was once again able to navigate by the stars. Apparently the skink artisans made copies of them for the Mage Lord immediately. Their expedition was an attempt to recover the mummified relics of one of the Lizardmen's former mage priests. They believed it was hidden in a necropolis in the lands of the undead, having been stolen in a raid many thousands of years ago. It seems likely that the reigning mage priest of the city, Lord Zuazamul, needed Ibn's first-hand knowledge of the great desert and the routes across it, because lizardmen, being creatures of the humid rainforest, were unaccustomed to survival or navigation in this arid land completely lacking in moisture. In the next extract, the expedition is well underway. It appears that only saurus and stegodons, which Ibn describes as great horned beasts, were selected for the expedition, accompanied by cohorts of skinks, and of course Ibn's own small contingent of Arabians and desert people.
We passed the dismal skull pillars which marked the borders of the lands of Al-Nehkara, and entered the truly desolate desert. Yenimini, a skink hero and leader of the expedition, reorganized the order of the march, placing all the stegodons that were laden down with the huge gourds of water in the rear of the column. The stegodons equipped with howdahs were placed in the fore, interspersed with cohorts of fierce Al-Sorim. My contingent went ahead of these, with Tuareg scouts searching for the way, seeking out waterholes, and keeping a lookout for the foe. Battle with the Al-Nehkarim could be expected at any time. The column marched for several hours after sunrise and sunset each day, and we rested during the night and the hottest part of the day. This was done because the Al-Sorim and their beasts became sluggish in the cold of night and the heat of day and needed to rest. It was also a very sound strategy, because the dust raised by the column would not be so apparent to the enemy in the haze of dawn and dusk. It was revealed to me that this time the Mage Lord of the city was attempting to send his thoughts out across the void to entrance the minds of a great adversary. I doubted whether such a thing was possible, but Yenimhi was utterly convinced that their lord could make him slothful and inactive if he discovered our presence in this land.
The Mage Lord had undoubtedly used his telepathic powers to search the deserts and find the place where his predecessors' relics were hidden, before dispatching Yenimhi to recover them.
It seems that he had managed his magical feat, because at length we saw the ruined pyramid necropolis as a mirage before us. I knew that this meant that the real necropolis was several days' march further north. There were no signs of any defenders until we came close to the actual ruins. Then it was clearly only a lesser servant of the great Ford of the Al-Nehkarim who came out to oppose us, and not the mighty horde of his overlord. Nevertheless, the army of the Al-Nehkarim were numerous. Their forces were made up of the skeleton chariotry of the former kings of that dreaded place, and his evil archers. They issued forth from their tomb shafts and attacked us in the heat of the day, forcing us to break camp to defend ourselves. The Al-Sorim were basking in the heat and gathered to their standards slowly, without any sense of urgency. I ordered my men to fall back to the crest of the next sand dune before the arrows fell among us, so as to delay the onset of the foe. This tactic worked, and the entire host of the evil ones followed us over the last great dune and into the massed ranks of the Alsorim, who were ready to slay them. The Alsorim were drawn up for battle, with the giant horned beasts to the fore. These charged into the approaching enemy. Behind them, but spaced between the monsters, were the cohorts of the Alsorim. These charged next, after the monsters had plunged deep into the enemy ranks, throwing them into disarray. Thus the Al-Mehgarin were destroyed as they collapsed in heaps of skulls and bones strewn across the desert. Their numbers could not prevail against the might of the Stegodons and the rage of the Alsorim. Although the wailing and the sight of the evil hordes would have struck utter terror into the hearts of mortal men, the Alsorim were not at all afraid. They just slew anything that came near. After the battle, the desert was silent. There was little fresh for the buzzards to fight over, since so few of the Alsorim had fallen. The army entered the necropolis. The pyramids of the city had been destroyed. All that was left were the dark, gaping shafts leading to the undead crypts below the ground. Without fear, the scribes entered each and every one into these in their search. Alsorim warriors were summoned to set to work, breaking open chambers and sarcophagi with bronze chisels. We made a great pile of what we found. On my instructions, the evil scrolls were burned, and several inert dummies of the former kings were dismembered, put to the torch, and scattered to the four winds. This was exactly as we had done with the corpse of the Tomb King, had led the horde against us. Then the scribes found what they were seeking, the relics of their ancient mage lord. A tattered bundle was all that remained. Many of the missing bones had no doubt been subjected to all manner of vile rituals by the evil necromancers. The scribes placed these upon the palanquin, which they brought with them for the purpose, with great awe and reverence.
The rest of the tale concerns Ibin's return journey. The skink scribes allowed Ibn to take all the gold and precious gems that had been found in the tombs or ripped from the mummies of the Tomb Kings. All the skinks wanted was their relic lord. The treasure amounted to a great heap which was laden onto the camels. This was Ibn's reward for leading the Lizardmen through the desert, so that he should not return empty-handed and incur the displeasure of the Sultan after his trade terms were so stubbornly rejected. After passing the Skull Pillars once more, Ibn's contingent set off westwards for Kar-Sabar, and the Lizardmen continued southwards to Zlatlan. Ibn reached Kar-Sabar and reported that there was no practical overland route to the southern seas. He also told the Sultan about the powerful armies of the lost realm of the Alsorim, who controlled the hinterland, and that they had no interest in opening up trade links with anyone. Although the Sultan was disappointed with this news, he was delighted with the vast treasure brought back by Ibn's caravan. But there was enough wealth left over to equip a new fleet of war dhows to challenge the High Elves and Cathians for the southern spice trade routes, ironically spurring Araby on to challenge the naval trade routes which they had been seeking to avoid with all the more gusto, and abandoning the land route to the Southlands.